those who have died in the cause of freedom, especially...
We are here to present another aspect, a longing for liberty, a willingness to fight for it against all odds. I am the fellow that organized this Lithuanian Partisan reenacting group. We're about a year and a half old. This is our third public presentation. We have a whole bunch of requests to do our shows in Philadelphia and Connecticut and Chicago. There's even talk of us taking our presentation to Lithuania to give to grade school, high school students a touch of the partisan war. But this is our first time in Pennsylvania. It feels wonderful. We've had two presentations in Baltimore, one at the 2004 festival, one at the 2005 festival. This is our first time here in Frackville. If people like us, we will be more than glad to come up next year. We had a lot of interest yesterday. There was a lot of conversations back and forth. Old people, young people, men, women. Tremendous reception, a lot of feedback. A lot of people gave us their names and addresses. They want a copy of our newsletter. They want to talk about their relatives who were partisans at the time. A lot of them gave their experiences. It was a treasure, both for us and for the people who visited us and saw our presentation. Our presentation is basically a collaborative effort. I have some items on display. There's a military collector, Henry Vaise. Some of his stuff is here. Then there's also Vaise, who runs the Living History program at Fort McHenry in Baltimore. And he has collected and contributed some of his stuff. As a matter of fact, Vaise, if it wasn't for Vaise at Fort McHenry, there would not be a Living History program, and Fort McHenry is where the national anthem was written. After World War II, partisans were essentially guerrilla fighters, small units that fought against an occupation. Whether it was Nazi occupation or Russian occupation or the Allied occupation, as a matter of fact, the Germans fought a very brief partisan/guerrilla warfare. Of course, the Russians would demean the partisans and call them bandits. But that's what Daumantas called the freedom fighters. That's why we call ourselves partisans, although in English the word has a connotation of more of a political flavor. Partisan politics and that sort of a context. But all words have different contexts, and there is no one size fits all, and the more context you can appreciate, the better off you are. To give that in a slightly deeper context, I listened to a lecture once by a Polish historian, a professor from Poland, who was talking about the Lithuanian-Polish winged hussars. And he obviously went through schooling during the communist period and everything, and he was feeling very uncomfortable because the winged hussar warriors called each other comrade. Well, just because the Russians called each other comrade doesn't mean you have to rewrite history. We still call, our fighting men still call each other comrades in arms. So words have many connotations. Just because somebody uses it in a context that's not exactly what yours are, does not mean you have to drop down to some level and modify yourself. They should be growing, and you should appreciate the many, many contexts of a word and different formats in which it's used. So they were called partisans then. They called themselves partisans. This is why we call ourselves partisans. And if somebody doesn't like it, grow. Get over it.
What does it feel like every time you put on the uniform? How does it change your personality or the way you present yourself?
I'm also a War of 1812 reenactor at Fort McHenry. And it's nice to read books. It's nice to see movies about the whole thing. I've been on the other end of the stick where I was talking to Civil War reenactors. And to see people living that life. I've been up to Gettysburg at their July 4th. You see them in period uniforms and period campsites and everything. To be living that life, you touch that history so much more. Now we show the tents that they would have used, the pre-war Lithuanian uniforms that they would have used. And when you dress up, you do feel that you are part of it. The people who are listening to you feel as though they are really reaching back into history and they are really participating or enjoying it. which they could never do just by reading a book or seeing a movie or having somebody tell them about it in a vacuum. Now you touch the artifact, you see the artifact, cuts the other way. When you go to a museum and it's all behind a glass case, it's nice and wonderful and cute, but you would like to hold it. You would like to see just exactly what does it feel like to have it on your head, like if it's a helmet, or to hold that spear or rifle or what have you. You appreciate it much more when you feel and say, okay, this is what they were actually holding. This is what they were actually using. It's a wonderful feeling for the living history reenactor, but it's also a wonderful feedback to the person who's looking at you, who's evaluating you, who's then going back into history and saying, oh yes, this is the way it was then. Reproduction, German machine guns, we had deactivated light machine guns that the Lithuanian army used that captured Russian PPSH submachine guns. And they were just enthralled to physically feel the item, to see how the action worked. Especially the boys were just fascinated by it. These are tents that they would have used in the early parts of the war, like in 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, before the Russians really intensified their efforts. When the Russians did intensify their efforts, then they had to go to underground bunkers. But initially they were able to have their command quarters in forests, and these tents would have worked out very well. I'd like to bring your attention to the typewriter, which is a period 1930-ish, 1940-ish typewriter. And besides actively fighting against the Russians and trying to keep them from deporting Lithuanians to Siberia, partisans were issuing newsletters, atrocities the Russians were committing, of their acts of trying to have a pseudo-election to legitimize their occupation of the country, and warning the people not to participate in it, to not contribute to their false idea of trying to make the whole occupation a legitimate kind of thing. So this is the typewriter to bring to mind the educational effort that the partisans put a lot of effort into. We have in one of our exhibits here a actual period newsletter, and here you can see a partisan, and here's his tent, and here's a typewriter very similar to this. He has a machine gun leaning on the side, he has a little makeshift table, and he's typing away a newsletter to inform the Lithuanian populace as to what's happening. So we're trying to recreate here what already has been documented. And we know for a fact that this did indeed take place. And like I said, we do have newsletters from the period, actual newsletters that are now 60, 70 years old approximately. So in 1950, at the age of 6, I came here to the States. All of my education has been here in the States, but we kept up the language, so I am fluent in both Lithuanian and English. So when we do go over to Lithuania with this show, I'll just chit-chat with them like nobody's business, and they will look at me and say, gee, you don't look like one of us, but you talk like one of us. The uniform I'm wearing is a major's uniform, pre-war Lithuanian army. A lot of the partisans were either active military personnel, National Guard, Cholet, or they were policemen, postmen, foresters. And if they held any kind of official position, they would try to wear the insignia, they would try to wear the uniform, try to preserve a Lithuanian government so that when the Americans and the British do drive the Russians home or make them go home, they could stay. The official structure remained in place throughout this whole period. It did not collapse, it did not go underground, it still functioned in the areas that they could control. And there were times when the partisans controlled whole villages and whole sections. In the 1950s, there were congressional hearings from deserters from the Russian army who would go after the partisans. And for the Russians, it was a horrible experience to go after the partisans. They would just get totally drunk because they knew that most of them would not come out of it alive. And I would say that for every partisan that the Russians killed, the Lithuanians killed at least one or two Russians or communists in their own right. So it was a very, very intense conflict between those who wanted to occupy us and those of us who did not want to be occupied. And it's dated 45 January 8th. So this is like a month and 2 days after I was born. And this is the partisan newsletter that went out, similar to what I showed was being typed over there. This is a newspaper published in July, May to July of '58 in New York City, talking about Daumantas, how he crossed the Iron Curtain to go to the West to inform them of what was happening in Lithuania. And here, obviously, all the faces are blanked out, so they could not be recognized. Later on, photograph came out without the faces blackened out, so we could see who the actual partisans were, and this is Daumantas. Interestingly, his wife, Nijolė Bražėnaitė, was here yesterday. We had a very long talk with her. She gave an interview to a reporter, so we got to meet one of the actors in that drama, a witness of the events.
On behalf of Council 144, the Anthracite Council of the Knights of Lithuania, who is sponsoring this event, I invite everyone to share in this day of celebration of the Lithuanian heritage and history, language, arts, and culture. It is a day of remembering the long, difficult, and dangerous road the Lithuanians had to travel to find freedom and preserve their culture.